But first, because they may be gone, but their deeds outlive them, the headlines lingering from the previous administration's 50 running scandals still Bush. Number 3, Cronyism-Gate. Mr. Bush is now gone for 3 long and happy weeks. But William Burke, Fred Fielding, Emmett Flood, and Daniel Price remain in Washington. Bush's senior aides, Fielding was his last White House counsel, in fact, they were appointed by the 43rd president to an obscure outlet of the World Bank called the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes. The jobs, and it's not a daily job, but the job can pay up to $3,000 a day plus travel expenses. And the appointments last through the year 2014. Other Bush golden parachutes produced non-paying jobs, which is why if you look now at the council that oversees our Holocaust Museum, you will now find Josh Bolten, Michael Mukasey, and Michael Chertoff. Number 2, Torture-Gate. More rebellion from the Bush ranks about what torture enabler John Yoo has called the Bush system, particularly Dick Cheney's embarrassing insistence last week that torture is the only way. Donald P. Gregg was Bush 41's national security advisor. He's out with an op-ed in the Philadelphia Inquirer speaking of his own experience in the CIA in Vietnam, when South Vietnamese torture produced incorrect intel on rocket aids, but CIA bargaining with North Vietnamese prisoners produced schedules of when the raids were planned. Gregg acknowledges that his story is only anecdotal, but he adds the key to successful interrogation is for the interrogator, even as he controls the situation, to recognize a prisoner's humanity, to understand his culture, background, and language. Torture makes this impossible. Cheney forgets that the Bush administration followed this approach with some success. A high-value prisoner subjected to patient interrogation by an Arabic-speaking FBI agent yielded highly useful information, including the final word on Iraq's weapons programs. His name was Saddam Hussein. And number 1, Revisionism-Gate. After Barack Obama's first presidential news conference, Billo the Clown interviewed Bush's first press secretary, Ari Fleischer, who mocked the president, calling on Sam Stein of Huffington Post for a question. Fleischer said, "You get a lot of .coms and other oddballs who come in there. They're screened." Orally interrupted, "Like the Huffington Post, now it gets called on." Fleischer continued to dig himself in deeper. "I used to see them all in one section. I would call it Siberia. And I told the president, don't call on Siberia." That's Ari Fleischer, whose White House press office first issued credentials to Jeff Gannon, real name James Guckert. Job, correspondent for conservative website Talon News. Real job? Well, there are kids watching. By the time of his presidential news conference in January 2005, Mr. Bush actually called on Gannon Guckert of Talon News for a question that ended with a reference to Democrats.
How are you going to work with people who seem to have divorced themselves from reality?
So, Billo, Ari, speaking of divorce from reality, who started giving news conference time and credibility to the .coms and other oddballs? And do you really think that within 6 weeks of getting its reporter called on by the president, Huffington Post is going to go dark the way Talon News did 6 weeks after Bush called on its ace reporter, Scoop Oddball.com?